Throughout history, there have been many disgusting facts that were gross, disturbing, or just plain rude and honestly surprising. From toxic makeup to the truth about the vomitorium. Some of these facts are truly, truly alarming. Join me, your guest host, Amanda McKnight, aka VampX13, as we dive into this nastiness to explore the top 10 disgusting historical facts they don't teach you in school. And let me know if your history teachers happen to be brave enough to let you know about any of these in the comments. Let's get into it. Number 10, oil bath. This actually is pretty smart, but is also kind of gross that it's been suggested that once these scented oils were used to cleanse the nobility, gathered up all the dirt on the elite on their surface of their skin before being scraped away to clean them, the oil would then be regathered and would be bottled up and would be resold, in some cases, to the lower class. Oh, ew. I don't want your used oil cleansing soap. That's nasty. Gladiators also apparently may have had their sweat or their dirty oil sold to the masses. So apparently gladiators' sweat was the OG e-girls bathwater. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Bumblebee, if you love to be one of the little bees in the hive, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Maybe we'll tell you about more gross, nasty stuff. Number 9, wiping in ancient Rome. Going to the bathroom is never a graceful experience, but it's made even worse when you're forced to use a sea sponge on a stick to wipe. Granted, that even doesn't sound so bad if you consider you are living way back in the time of ancient Rome, where I will say I'm also impressed that thanks to the aqueducts, they actually would have had plumbing back then. Until then, again, you learn that that sponge on a stick was likely shared with anyone else who came into your home to use the toilets, or the communal area where the forche was located. To make it even more unappealing, you only got the sponge stick if you were wealthy. So the sponge stick is actually the best case scenario here. The worst case scenario meant that you would have to instead use broken and discarded pieces of pottery. Ouch! Don't worry though, at least us more common folk would typically have these pieces recut so they would be smoother and not jagged so that you wouldn't hurt yourself when you're wiping. You don't want to poke your butt. Still, how do you even, come on, what is even happening with that? I never thought I'd say this, but give me that sponge on a stick, please. Number 8, the truth about the vomitorium. Many people think of the vomitorium as a place in which wealthy Romans would retire to in order to upchuck their food, but this actually simply isn't so. In fact, from us looking into the matter further, it seems that implications on the historical text come from people trying to make other Roman elites basically look bad, and use this to show that they were morally corrupt, by suggesting, or perhaps relaying, if it's true, that rather than keep their food down, they would basically upchuck it so they could simply just eat more food. I mean, it makes you look, pretty greedy and pretty wasteful. It's wasteful, it's irresponsible, and ultimately it's considered un-Roman, which is why some historians wrote about it in regards to certain figures, to basically send home the point that those folks were bad guys. In reality, the vomitorium actually is an architectural term that comes from the entertainment passages used for people to basically exit and enter through in an entertainment center. So the people could spew forth onto the streets or into their seats. Not spew from their mouths, just in reference to large groups of people entering or exiting, moving around. So that's what it really means. Now you know. But also some people probably did do the other thing, so it's a little gross. Number 7, wine versus water. While wine has often been seen as a huge part of ancient Roman culture, with people often drinking wine continuously throughout their day, albeit usually weaker, watered down wine, some believed women were not actually even permitted to drink the stuff. Based on recent findings though, it's more likely that women were just severely restricted in this regard, and that the drink was considered to be problematic for women when consumed in excess and could cause debauchery and adultery amongst them. That's what people thought. I personally would say that wine, when consumed in excess, is pretty problematic for most people. But I digress. Augustus's daughter Julia was actually denied wine, it's believed, for that reason, as part of her punishment, because she was being a bad woman. Bad woman, no wine for you. So while at certain events or festivals you would be permitted to drink certain kinds of wine as a woman, doing so in excess and being caught could be punishable. It was even believed that the man who owned the woman would actually kiss her to ascertain if she had actually been drinking, and if she had been doing so against the rules, she would basically be punished. There are records of women who were charged fines for being caught doing so when they should not have been, and even those who actually lost their lives apparently due to them consuming wine, being beaten, or being starved. That's pretty terrible. Number 6, toxic makeup. Makeup and its history is not something you'll see covered in school, and it's really gross, and it probably should have been covered in school because it's pretty crazy when you look into it. In fact, most of what I learned about the dangers of makeup was actually learned from my own research into the subject and my own obsession with the Victorian era, as well as my own obsession with just ingredients that are in makeup even today. The Victorian era was actually around the time we saw the decline in people poisoning themselves with makeup due to the more natural look becoming trendy, so people weren't wearing as much makeup. But it was there that I started to learn about the dangers that came to those who did use makeup, and then I also became obsessed with the Elizabethan era and learned even more about how deadly makeup was. Basically, as early as the days of ancient Egypt, in fact, and even before probably, people were basically putting poison on their face. I mean, even today, we probably are to an extent. Like, I'm sure in the future, someone's gonna do a video like this, and they're gonna be like, back in 2023, people were putting this on their face, and it was terrible for them. Coal, which was commonly used back in ancient Egypt, is made from lead sulfite. And in Queen Elizabeth I's day and age, the makeup she used to create her stark, desirable, pale complexion was Venetian Cruz, which is white lead-based makeup. Some believe her doing so may have actually even led to her own death, or may have contributed at least. Number 5, the danger of dishes. Ooh, dishes. But really though, it is dangerous. Dishes and fancy goblets that are ancient were also later revealed to be quite dangerous. So if someone pulls like a cup out and they're like, this cup's from 1542, maybe don't drink out of that cup. That's what I would say. Oh, but also don't, because that should be in a museum. Much as we learned about the dangers of makeup after the fact, the same happened with our plates, our cookware, and fancy goblets that the wealthy often ate off of and drank from. You see, fancy dishware was often glazed in lead. Once again, we love the lead, which means that lead ended up leaking into people's food and their drink. It's no wonder people seemed a little more irrational and quick to temper back then. People were literally having their minds warped by lead poisoning. Today, when we get irrational and a little much, we have no excuse. At least we're not drinking out of lead cups and such like that. What's our excuse? The internet. That's our excuse. The internet did it to me. Number 4, keep away from fire. One of the most disturbing and horrifically disgusting things I learned while growing up and studying history myself is the truth about ballerinas and how knowingly flammable their costumes were. Like, at first we didn't know, but then we figured it out and we just kept doing that. I heard a story on the Lore podcast about this that still haunts me to this day, which if you haven't listened to Lore, you should check it out. It's a really great podcast. This story is the story of Emma Livery. She was a ballerina who during rehearsal had her costume basically go up in flames. Now, while she suffered for months clinging to life as the costume had clung and burned against her skin in the flames, with the corset she was wearing actually melting under the heat and like kind of melding with her, she soon after passed away as a result of her injuries. Now, the most horrifying thing about this is that she actually swore if she were ever to dance again, which I don't believe she did, she would not do so in the more flame retardant costumes that were currently being made at that time, as they were simply too ugly by comparison. So even she, who was suffering from that, was like, I will never do it. I won't do it. It's ugly. Girl, what? That's terrible. Number 3, the discovery of radium. In terms of science, one of the figures who has always stood out to me in terms of her accomplishments was Marie Curie, or Madame Curie as she was often also known. Now, while she changed her name after moving to France, Marie Curie was originally actually named Maria Sklodowska and came from Poland. She moved to France for a chance at an education and ended up becoming a physicist who helped, along with her husband, to discover the elements polonium and radium. Marie and Pierre both worked hands-on with these materials, studying their radioactivity, unknowingly making themselves both sick in the process. It was because of Marie's discoveries, though, that she was able to create her own mobile X-rays, which were actually used to help diagnose and treat soldiers in World War II, known as Petite Curies. Her work was also instrumental in helping to understand radiation and helping to fight against cancer. So, while there's some shocking things about what she had to deal with as a result in her life, it's still like really amazing what she was able to do. Number 2, proper equipment. This revelation had me literally yelling at the screen when I watched Chernobyl, the miniseries that focuses on the truth behind the horrifying nuclear disaster in Russia. Now that being said, of course it is a dramatic retelling, so not everything is true, and you can look into that if you would like. But what shocked me, and what I believe was true, is I can't believe we didn't learn more about how devastating this event was, as it had a huge historical impact on the world and the country, and could have had an even bigger one than it did considering. At the Chernobyl nuclear plant, you see, after the disaster happened, they weren't actually able to monitor how bad their problem was when they noticed something was wrong due to the fact that all their dosimeters for measuring radiation levels basically topped out at 3.6, which is higher than normal, but it's nothing to panic about. But also, you wouldn't know when to panic because you don't have anything that goes higher than that. Now, this is because it wasn't believed that a catastrophe, especially of this scale, was possible at a Soviet Union nuclear power plant. Basically, they were just like kind of in denial that anything like that could ever happen there, which is a problem because you never know. Clearly. Number 1, end of the world. While it's still debatable as to whether or not this could have been the end of the world, some have suggested that for much of Europe, had Chernobyl not been controlled, it most certainly would have been. In the HBO docuseries, it's implied that the radiation emitted would in essence cause all of Russia pretty much to be like inhospitable, as well as much of Europe. Some have said the show plays up, the end of the world scenario, while others say we don't really know how bad it was since much of the best texts on the scenario have yet to be translated, with some of which possibly still being kept under wraps by Russia. So can't really know, but it's really interesting when you look into it and hear what, people that work in nuclear science have to say about what they think could have happened if we hadn't done anything. Be scary. That's about it. I will see you in the future.